All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to begin our committee reviews of the executive's proposed budget. And today we have the Board of Appeals, the Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings, and DPS, and a CIP set of proposals. So why don't we begin with the Board of Appeals? Come on up. Jean Arthur. We have Barbara J.,
And
Executive
John.
Director, and we have Phil Wida and John, you'll need to press the button. Yep.
On
And
Pentecost, Chairman.
thank you, John. Nice to see you.
This may be the easiest part of your day. So,
That's
Yeah.
a big statement, Jean. I don't know.
well, okay, I hope for you that this is the easiest part of your day. So you have Board of Appeals, and the budget is showing a slight decrease from last year, well, decrease, not slight. And it's all in operating expenses, and I've talked with Board of Appeals quite a bit, and nobody's happy about the cut in operating expenses, but we're not making a fuss about it today. Is the bottom line.
Okay. Questions? Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I just, speaking of that, it's a 2.8% decrease, 44% cut in operating expenses from my math. I just want to make sure, do you think that those cuts will have any impact on your ability to deliver services or in the quality of services that you're able to provide?
Morning, Mr. Friedson. If I may, the cuts are the same cuts that we implemented for fiscal 19 in response to the request for target reductions. And our business is driven by the public. We're completely dependent on the number of variances, the number of administrative appeals, the number of special exception modifications that walk in the door for the volume of work that we do. That volume has been increasing in recent years, but in looking at our year-to-date spending, comparing it historically to the actual spending, we think we'll be able to absorb this cut. We just did our third quarter analysis earlier this week, and we are on track to be able to absorb the cut this year with a slight surplus at the end of the year in operating expenses.
So just to clarify, so I understand, this would basically continue with your savings plan level of funding into a full year for FY20. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. It looks a little bit worse than it is because in fiscal 19 we had a $20,000 extra expenditure or extra appropriation, excuse me, for some of the needed renovations to our office space.
Okay. You know better than I would if it can work.
That said, there is a hurricane offshore, which is the applications for small cells.
Our
And
office, I think, will not be involved with the small cells. I think that as it stands now, those will go to the Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings.
so they don't come to the board.
I believe that in the interest of meeting the shot clock, the legislation was done so that appeals of those decisions go straight to the circuit court and do not come to the Board of Appeals. I could be wrong about that.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more maybe with Oza. Okay.
Yeah, that's mentioned in their budget.
Okay. Got it. Any other questions, comments? Seems pretty straightforward. Thank you for your work. Appreciate your service.
Thank you.
All right. Approved.
So the next one is, oh, I'm sorry, that's your line.
Next is Oza, Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings.
Good morning.
Morning.
Gentlemen. For the record, Marty Grossman, and with me, Sarah Bahana and Lynn Roberson.
Once again, the cut here is in operating expenses, a huge cut. And as you mentioned before, although if everything stays exactly how it is now, this office may be able to absorb the cut, but we don't know what's going to happen with small cell towers. And if that were to happen as it's been predicted, meaning a flood of applicants, this will not be enough to cover that expense.
Not by a long shot. At the moment, the industry is not submitting its applications, right? We've established a zoning framework for commercial property, but residential areas, presently, our zoning code says you can't be closer than 300 feet, and the industry has some, the federal preemption rules are in conflict with that, and the industry has withheld its applications while it has sought some legislation in Annapolis, which there has been no change in Annapolis. And so it really feels like there is a hurricane that's going to make landing. What happens if they want to proceed with several hundred applications?
Well, that's what we had money in the budget for in the last couple of years, and since it's never materialized, we agreed with the budget cuts, which essentially cut that flexibility out. We lost money from transcripts and from our contract hearing examiner funds. And so we agreed to that because as it stands now, without any of this barrage of small cell tower cases, we would have sufficient funds to cover our expenses.
We would have to let's just say if the applications are submitted, we're going to need to have a kind of an emergency meeting to figure out what to do. I think
Right.
probably not much more we can say about it at this point than that, but we've got, what we really have to do is resolve the zoning code and the conflicts in the code so that we can have a framework that is manageable. That's what we really need to do.
And I alerted the Office of Management and Budget by a letter that was still in the offing a possibility, but
Right.
right now, the funding as requested now is sufficient.
Right. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Morning.
So you said there was a flexibility added in previous years that would have allowed in case you got some of the applications, correct?
Yes, we essentially did three things. We added or requested, and it was granted, additional money in our budget to.
How much was that again?
It was an additional $30,000 or so for the contract hearing examiners, and additional $8,000 to $10,000 for transcript costs. And we had that. We also added an additional contract hearing examiner. It cost us nothing unless we use the additional contract hearing examiner. And we proposed changes in our rules that would allow us to consolidate cases with clear standards and more flexibility in the conduct of our hearings. Those didn't go through when the last zoning text amendment stopped, but that would still be in the offing. So those were what we did to prepare in case we were faced with it, but we still haven't been faced with it. We only have one cell tower case this past year.
Sure.
So
And what do you do what happens with that excess money when you didn't have to use it?
it would be returned. It would not be used.
So that was what happened in the
Yes.
previous, okay, got it. And so, to the chair's point, if we need to revisit this at some point, we could hopefully quickly revisit it.
Let's talk about this a little more. To that point, I'm a little worried that if the applications come in, we're really behind the ball. We have to introduce potentially a supplemental appropriation. You've just got this drawn-out process to do, even to avoid a real problem for you. That seems imprudent. Mr. Weeda, what was the rationale for proposing the reduction?
I think it was
Oh,
just the
Sarah?
standard reduction that they asked everybody to take. Phil wasn't our OMB specialist at the time, so I don't think he was.
Oh, was not? Okay.
No.
All departments were asked to take a reduction of budget, so.
Okay, but this is the 38.7%.
I think what happened, the reason our portion is so large from our operating budget is because as a small agency with only 4 employees,
Right.
there's no flexibility to cut personnel costs, so everything had to come out of the operating budget, and the 4% was taken on our entire budget, which meant a very drastic cut in the operating expenses, which are relatively small overall. So that's why it's such a large percentage.
Gene, do you have concerns about that?
I do have the same concerns that you just expressed. Yes, it seems like at some point, we're going to get these applications for small cell towers, and the question is, in my mind, is the office equipped right now to keep ahead while we go through supplemental appropriations, finding contractors, et cetera?
Right.
And
So the answer is, let's hear your view on that.
I think actually we are, because so far we have spent relatively small amount of money this year on contract hearing examiners, and I would anticipate, given our usual caseload, right now, we've actually had a decline in conditional use cases and so on, so I don't think that we're likely to be in extremis immediately unless we receive 200 cases at once from the small cell towers, but since I would anticipate that we'd get some advance notice of what's going on, so if we had to begin a process of a supplemental, we would have some time to do that. Since
Okay, great. Now, just to raise a policy issue, when we were taking up the zoning, I think I'm going to say this mostly for my colleagues, when we took up the zoning text amendment last time on this issue, some of the proposals required extensive hearings from our process. And the average cost of these hearings in our estimation was $25,000 per hearing, something like that. And so the cost implication of having that kind of full process for each application was massive. You were talking, it could cost $15 million to process all the expected applications. So you can see, here's our budget now. We're in a total expenditures, $686,000, and then suddenly you're looking at $15 million being required over a couple of years. And so what we had talked about doing was trying to come up with a streamlined approach for the applications so that we could manage them in a timely and efficient way. The problem was that some legislators wanted to just say no compromise. You're going to have this $25,000, $20,000 per application process regardless. And if we stuck to that and then build them for that, build the applicants for that, build the industry for that, and then they take us to court, and then it turns out that we're in total violation of the FCC's order, and the FCC's order is upheld as to what a maximum reasonable fee is, which we think is, they've said maybe it's closer to $1,000, then we're the ones picking up the tab. So that $14-15 million, whatever that amount is coming out of our pocket instead of coming out of the industry's pocket. So that is the situation that we're in. We have to assess the risk of a fee for those hearings that is, anything more than what we can defend in court is going to come out of our pocket if we lose the case. So that's just a little background as part of this whole issue that we're going to have to return to. I don't think there's really any alternative. All right. With that, I think you're approved. I don't see any further comments. And
Just quickly, I say lest the people watching think government is not lean and honest about when they can take reductions. The last two would be good examples. So thank you for your
thank you.
testimony.
Although nobody's ever accused me of being lean, but that's. Thank you.
you're just robust. Okay, thank you. Let's see if we can keep up the momentum as
Right,
we tackle.
the momentum works, but a moment of history here for a second. On this day in 1947, Jackie Robinson was in the first exhibition game with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Also in 1968, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act on this date. On this date, this is the last meeting you will have Diane Schwartz-Jones as your director.
That's too bad.
She is leaving at the end of the month. It has been my privilege to work with her, and I just needed to.
Oh, you're getting misty. You're getting misty-eyed.
I am.
Diane, we're going to miss you.
I'm getting
We are.
old. What
Yeah.
can I tell you?
You-
In any event.
No, wait, pause. We're going to talk about Diane for a moment. I remember when I first met you, when I started at the council 8-9 years ago, and you came in and you briefed me on some of the big projects you were working on, and you were doing the zoning and the real estate and many other special initiatives for County Executive Leggett, and you did a fantastic job with that. We were always, when you were at the dais, the council had to be on its game. Let's just say that, because you really know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about. You know the issues cold. And it was fun to engage with you in that capacity. And then you took over DPS, and you've been a force to be reckoned with. And there are few officials whom I've had as much confidence in, knowing that whatever it is, the way that you handle us with such integrity and such depth and such skill and such capacity. And, we've been through a lot of tough issues. DPS, I mean, and I say this to the whole department, the work that you do, you rarely get the compliments. You just deal with the complaints. But we do hear a lot of compliments. And that's because of the professionalism and the courtesy and the skill of you and your team and the leadership of the department. And, it's a very well-run department. Of course, we can do better, and we're going to always improve. Continuous improvement is your motto. And there's always ways to do better. But Diane, you've been a titan in Montgomery County and for decades. And we're going to miss you. And we hope you'll stay close and maybe come back one day. So.
Thank you so much. I mean, it means a lot to me that you say this, and it is a labor of love, and it has been from the first day I crossed the threshold of the county attorney's office. And you've given me the tools. The council, the county executive, supported the things. We've tried to do the policy directions, and you've given us the tools to do it consistently. And it's not one person. It's a team. And if anybody out there doesn't have a life and is listening to DPS budget session, this would be my opportunity to put in a plug for public service.
Yeah.
Because there is nothing more rewarding than public service, and that knowing that you work in a community that you love, and hopefully you leave it better at the end of the day than you found it when you began. But thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you.
Well, that's meaningful. The head of the Department of Permitting Services, an agency and a leader who is always receiving criticism, nevertheless, because that's just the role, that's the function. I mean, it's like local government. It's like being a council member too, by the way. It's part of the job. It comes with the territory, but yet you feel that there's nothing more rewarding than providing that service and having the opportunity to solve and meet community needs and make the community a better place. And you stand here proclaiming your tremendous satisfaction with that work. That means a lot. I hope that people do take note of that and appreciate what it can mean to provide that and to do it so ably as you've done.
You're not quite done with me, because
Oh.
while I'm retiring, I have committed to the county executive that I would also help him with for business and with transition, but in a different capacity. So
Okay.
I will be retiring April 30th and helping where I can beyond.
So in some consulting capacity, is that what you mean, essentially, or?
As you know, the For Business initiative is moving forward. County.
That's what it's called, the For Business?
The For Business benchmarking to be the best for business. It is it's going to be a fairly big effort on the part of the county executive, and Council Vice President Reamer has also, Council Vice President Katz. I know I'm looking at Mr. Reamer, but are partnering on trying to bring businesses out to engage in conversations about what they need, about doing some benchmarking from across the board regulatory perspective, whatever the department might be, to try to understand what is it, like we did with the streamlining, as you'll recall, what are pain points, what are things that businesses need, what are things that we can do to help improve the environment for our businesses and the perspective and the relationships, and at the end of the day, have work plans for the various departments that will also include items that will help to both improve perspective, relationships, experiences, and the whole climate, if you will.
And your role going forward will be?
Well, my role going forward will be really to support this, to kind of try to continue to drive it forward.
So you're going to continue to be employed? That's the real question I meant.
So as a
You're not sure
contractor,
yet.
in a
As a
contract,
contractor, okay.
in a contract role,
Great.
to try to help keeping this moving forward and getting outcomes that we all want to see.
Okay, thank you. So can we schedule a Fed meeting in the, near to midterm to hear more about this initiative? I've heard it out there in the atmosphere, but I haven't seen it. I heard that a press release went out, but I haven't seen. It went out yesterday. I may not be on the council press release list for some reason anymore. I went from getting 20 a day to none, I guess. But I want to hear more about this. I'm interested in it. So
There are a series of listening tours that are coming up, 6, one during the day next week, and then there's going to be one in each of the regional service center areas in the evenings. There will be a record collected. We have a website collected. Be happy to brief you on it.
Okay.
we'll take that up.
I'll do that.
Councilmember Friedson.
Well, let me add to the plaudits. I'll get to the be best or for business or whatever we're calling it this week. But I did just want to thank you, mostly as a resident and a little bit as a council member, since I haven't been here for all that long. But extremely sorry to see you go. This is perhaps the most difficult job, most challenging job in county government for all of the reasons that Chair Reamer mentioned. That you're like the referee. There aren't a lot of people who walk away, players or fans, who walk away from a game and say, man, those referees, whew, they were terrific. I really, if we could make sure we have those same referees at every game, I'd be awfully happy. And that's tough because it's a really difficult job to do. It's really critical. You are really the department that is in the most significant way interfacing between the interests of the public and the ability for businesses and residents to be able to do what they need to do to get the economy going. And that very difficult tightrope that you are balancing on a daily basis is great. And to have somebody with your breadth of knowledge of county government, to have had somebody with your commitment to the community as a longstanding resident, has just been really, really helpful. You haven't gotten I think the credit you deserve for the changes that you've made. I think with the website changes in particular, which I know you worked really hard on, which should be a source of pride for you, which is kind of the gateway. That's your Statue of Liberty, the first thing that folks see as they interface with the department. I think that is just one piece of improvements to it, and I hope that it will continue to improve, and that the philosophy of constant improvement continues. And so I just wanted to thank you for that, and thank you for your service, and thank you for your broader commitment to public service. And I am extremely glad that you'll be continuing on in some capacity to help serve the county and to serve our community, although it will be a significant loss to lose you in the department.
Thank you so much. I have to say, if I can just have a minute to plug the county, and just also because we hear so many negative things, and I really do appreciate it. I really do. It's not about Diane Jones. It's about everything that we do. It's about the laws that the council adopts. It's about the department that implements them and how we do it. And the Department of Permitting Services it has two roles. It is a public safety net for knowing that buildings are safe and that the occupants who come in, whether today or future generations out, will be safe in them. But it is also an economic engine, and making sure that what we do effectively and efficiently so that businesses can get up and open. And we know that each day of delay is is a dollar that can never be reclaimed. We understand that, and we work hard. I think that we hear so much that sometimes we forget to look at some of the incredible accomplishments of Montgomery County, whether it's getting a Clarksburg premium outlets open, under construction, open, fully occupied, with 90 tenancies within 1 year. And that includes all the construction, it includes the permitting, it includes the occupancies for all of those tenants. Whether it's a United Therapeutics with its incredibly, incredibly progressive net zero building, and working with them to make sure that they can get the permits that they need to do the incredible things that they do within the walls of that building or within the energy neutrality framework that they're operating within. Whether it is the new hospital in Holy Cross up in Germantown, or the new one down in Silver Spring, or whether it is the new world headquarters for the Marriott, or whether it is the 50,000 plus approvals, licenses, and pieces of business that make its way out of the doors of DPS each year. And I think that, I appreciate the words of acknowledgement, but it's the entire department that is making this happen, whether it's the complete implementation of a completely revamped zoning ordinance, a completely revamped subdivision regulation amendments. This happened, I know that Mr. Reamer was there for that, but getting it implemented effectively and seamlessly, this was a department that got this done. So cutting the fees, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times, and completely studying it and restructuring it. Shaving 2.5 months off of commercial permits issuance, eliminated any backlog whatsoever on sign permits, record plats, and so many other things, right-of-way permits. So I think that this is the work of a department. It's not the work of one person, but it gets lost in the conversation as we beat ourselves up about whether we're business friendly or not. And I just appreciate you indulging me with the platform to point it out.
Well, I thank you for that, and I think you just demonstrated what a passionate advocate you are and what a loss you will be, even though it's the entire department. Leadership starts at the top. That's true of the county, and it's true of every department within county government. And we have a lot of vacancies now in county government and desperately need leadership across the board in many of our departments and a direction. So I'm hopeful, given how important this role is, that your position gets filled quickly, because you are such a tremendous loss. And speaking of the For Business initiative, all I have to say is, one, I'm glad you're going to be part of it, and that Councilmember Katz is part of it. I look forward to some actual results from that. We've heard a lot about it for the last several months, 6, 8, 9 months, and so it'll be good to actually see that effort take hold. And I am, for one, just very glad that it's no longer the goal to not be the worst place in the world for business, because that was how this was framed for the first several months of this, that our goal is to be the best place for business. Doesn't mean the cheapest, it doesn't mean the least regulation for business, but the best for business in terms of the total package of what value we are providing. I think that's a much more serious and beneficial goal than to not be the worst. And so I appreciate that, and look forward to appreciate the fact that we're going to have a briefing on this to actually learn what it looks like, because all I have seen was the social media flyer as well, with the dates of the different meetings that apparently were announced, I think, yesterday. So thank you so much.
Councilmember Dewanda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Diane, I want to also thank you for your service, and I'm disappointed that you're leaving, but very happy that you're staying on in the new capacity, because I think your knowledge and perspective and demeanor, frankly, are going to be needed in that effort and transition. So I'm excited to hear that, and hopefully I can still kind of from time to time tug on you for your old job and ask some advice, in your old capacity. So can I get that on the record, that you'll allow me to do that?
You can get that on the record for any one of you, and anybody. I am gone but not far. I am always reachable. I'm always happy to help. So I truly.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And we discussed when we, in one of our first meetings, the number of improvements that you just rattled off. I still think there's a significant public relations challenge that we have. I as with all reputations, some of it's warranted and some of it's not. and it takes on a life of its own. And the things that you mentioned, the two and a half month decrease, cutting fees several times. I think if you ask, I'd be curious when you're running these business sessions, I think one of the questions should be, did you know we've done all this? And I think the answer is going to be no. And that speaks to part of our challenge is how do we continually send the message and everyone's singing from the same choir sheet about what we have done. Not saying we're perfect, but we've made improvement. We're making continuous improvement. And I think for the work you've done has been great, but I think we need to all talk about it more as we continually improve. So I just want to thank you for your service. And you mentioned Holy Cross Germantown. My son was just born there. It's a beautiful place, and it was up to code. I felt very safe. And so, so good job there. But no, just seriously, thank you, and excited you're staying on, and looking forward to working with your entire staff. So, congratulations also. Thank you.
Yes, so we'll take up the this task force. I do share the kind of general perspective from Councilmember Friedson. I have noted that this went from within the first year of being county executive, I'm going to make sure this is the best place to do business, to one of these days we're going to get around to having a task force that's going to address the fact that we shouldn't be the worst. That is a big shift. So I want to see it back to what it was intended to be, what people got excited about, and make sure we fulfill that. So you've got a big task ahead of yourselves. Thank you. Now, let's talk about your budget.
There you go. And the first thing I'd like to say is for our new council members, this is radically different than almost any other budget you'll see. Although by law, it's not an enterprise fund that has to make all its expenditures by fees. This department does that. And that's a matter of policy that's been since the department was formed. This is not a tax-supported department. It is supported totally by fees. And it, just like the hearing examiner and the Board of Appeals, its workload is determined by what comes in the door. And that creates a situation with fees is that you have to make sure you have reserves in case there is some downturn. And the policy for that is a 20% reserve when we get to revenues. The budget for the department is just a hair over $42 million in expenditures. It's not at all surprising that the major driver between this year's and last year's budget is a little bit more than 5% increase in compensation going into next year. That itself is an issue the council will take up, I think, on the 23rd and then the 30th. Certainly, if you change anything there, it might change the budget here. But given this situation and given the expected activity level and the need for reserves, the department and the executive is recommending a 5% increase in fees.
Can we pause there? Why is it 5%? And if your target is a 20% balance, you've got 21.5.
First of all, it's the 21.5 it's just a picture in time when this is all put together, a snapshot in time on what we think the end of year reserves are going to be. They're constantly changing because based on what's coming in or not coming in. We have a huge unknown coming up to us, coming in the next year and a half, which is the move to Wheaton. We don't know yet exactly what the extra expenses are going to be. We're still waiting to see what is going to be involved with that move. We don't know whether the revenues are actually going to hit what we expect them to hit. And in fact, I dare say that this month they've been down quite a bit over what they were last year, just for this month alone. So the difference is really, I'm sorry, one other really important thing that I wanted to mention is that you all have seen some correspondence relative to our fire code compliance fees, the law change, the regulation change that took effect this past fall. One of the things that we realized with that once it went into place was that there is an unintended consequence on condominiums. Someone has written to you about this, and we looked at it and we agree. And so we are going to be proposing an emergency regulation, which was also going to bring down our revenues by about $670,000. So at the end of the day, the reserve that we're hitting is 20.5%. That's right on the margin. And when you look in the out years, we're at we're less than whatever the policy amount would be as you're carrying it out. If we don't do this now, we're going to have a bigger problem next year. And so it is a modest increase, considering all the times that we've decreased our fees, considering the times that we forewent. We didn't adjust our fees in order to have stability and hold them down. And we even dipped into the cash reserve that was intended for the Wheaton building to avoid increasing fees. But when, at the end of the day, our costs keep going up. The cost of labor goes up. The cost of our rent in the location that we're at goes up. We eliminated the automation fee, which was actually, we had a 5% automation fee when we built our rates. That's gone completely because it's gone down to zero. So we're at the point right now where we really don't have any margin. And so I would, I think the 5% is modest, it's reasonable, and I hope that you would recommend approving it.
All right.
The rates were stable for, I believe, 3 years after their first adoption, and last year it was raised 3%.
Let's use the lights.
And today, from that fee that was raised from 3% is an additional 5% increase. So there's a little bit of compounding going on, which is understandable. But certainly, just based on their cost, the fee increase is justified, given the compensations. And it is true on the building that what was in last year's approved budget was about $4.1 million a capital contribution to Wheaton from fee payments before, but that is required to go into reserves. The department has contributed $21 million in cash to the Wheaton building already. The $4 million that was expected will be part of increased in bonding. But with this issue on the increase in fees, there's a separate resolution that the county has asked the council to approve. That will come to the council first for public hearing on the 23rd with all the other revenue issues, and then that will be a separate decision. I would suggest that if you are agreeable to that fee now, that it not go back to committee, that resolution goes straight to council.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I'll hold off on speaking of that because I wanted to speak to some of the things that you mentioned. One is the move to Wheaton. I'm glad you brought it up. I'm glad that the county executive included the move to Wheaton in your budget. He didn't in Park and Planning's, which is a concern that we'll have to take up separately, but I think it's important to note that is a good piece, that there are moving expenses that are part of your budget. Is that accurate?
It is accurate. It is an unknown. I also, can I clarify one thing, though? The Department of Permitting Services share of the Wheaton building is $35 million. We've, as Jeff said, we've put 21 in cash. It was our excess reserve that before we had done that was built up with the
in terms of the construction cost of the building.
This is for the hard cost construction, soft cost.
Not the moving cost.
Not the moving. Yeah. We know, one of the things that is in our budget, there's a fairly high IT number because we have to get new servers for that building. We know that, and because everything we do is powerfully IT related. Our electronic plans processing, our electronic permits, virtually everything that we do. So we know that that's going to be expensive. We know that the building we will have costs of moving. Some of it will be covered in the project costs, and we're not managing that, but we also know there are going to be costs that aren't going to be included, and we need to make sure that we're covered. it may not be feasible to take down the smart boards that we work with in our design consultations, just the cost of taking them down and then moving them, whereas we would need to probably be purchasing new smart boards and new things, and the conference rooms are going to be set up differently. There are a lot of little things that are still unknowns, and we don't want to be so far behind the curve that we can't get up and operate effectively when we get there.
Absolutely.
So-
So you mentioned the servers, something like the servers and the technology interface. Are there conversations with the other departments that are moving into Wheaton to share servers or to share technology infrastructure for cost savings?
So I'm going to invite, I know that our IT division chief is here, but there have been many conversations about the technology. We are sharing a room. There will be there's a grate or sort of a fence between the servers. To do this, our systems, you have to have somebody who's accountable for all the systems. I'd like Tom to speak to how we're handling ours and whether or not there have been conversations on doing them together. Keep in mind, though, that I will admittedly say that DPS has been very concerned about relinquishing control because we have to be available. We have to be available at all times, whether it's our historic information for whether it's police or firefighters in the event of an emergency to have that available, whether it's for the SSTAT records, whether it's for the permits or the processing of permits. We zealously make sure that we can always be available to serve. So I just want to put that out there as a fundamental threshold for how we approach our IT as well. But Tom?
Good morning. Tom Laycock, I'm the Chief of IT Services for Permitting Services. We have been in conversation with Technology Services for the configuration of the servers and the quantity, the actual specifics of what goes where. We have always run our own computers and servers in the department in support of those. We rarely rely on Technology Services, but we do coordinate with them and support their initiatives over time. The question of shared servers deals with first, Park and Planning is a large agency going in there. They're a state agency, and they have their own configurations and support for that. DEP has some small servers and all, but our systems are fully operational and fully redundant and disaster recovery at all times because we are a production system. We are production operations with all of the e-services that we do. Apply online for your permits, pay your fees, do the plan review upload, and also the payments process as well, and then archive it into our document imaging system. So we have gone to COOP. We actually had problems in the power in the building that we have now, and thankfully we're going to Wheaton in much better situation. But we did go to COOP. We went to the auditorium, and our servers, our disaster recovery server was promoted to be our production server at that time, and then we continued to operate. We served customers for the week and then came back to our building when power was stabilized by PEPCO. We don't share servers with other departments now, simply for performance and for our configuration and operation. If we need to stand up a server or servers, we are doing an upgrade now for our electronic plan review system. We just started that. We have to stand up 8 new servers. They're not physical servers, they're virtual machines. So we're using many different capabilities on one physical host. So that technology, it's basically, we configure it to support our needs as needs evolve and initiatives come forward to us. We don't share the service today, and because we are an enterprise fund, there would be some policy and funding issues if we were to serve and share within even DTS or configure with other folks in that building. Our theory is basically if there is not the capability for customers to reach into our servers, okay, we can still do business if that capability, if the cord is cut coming into the building and you cannot get to us electronically, we can continue to operate as long as we have air conditioning and electricity in the building. Customers would have to come to Wheaton to do that business, but we would stand up and we would be operational at all times. And because we have done disaster recovery on all of our systems, everything right now, when we post it to our production server, is immediately updated to a disaster recovery server for everything we do. including all imaging that we do in the department. So we are a very production-oriented operation, and we've grown to that point. And taking a shared environment with collaboration and shared resources, the shared resources is a concern to me because of the detraction in performance for our operation. Being enterprise funded, the funds were dedicated to the operation and performance of the department, and were not going to be shared across resources in other departments. So in some, we have done COOP. We continue to operate fully operational for redundant operations. We see that as our best method for serve customers going forward for the enterprise.
So if I may, but where cost savings could be accrued, for example, the co-location within a single server room, that has been achieved in the Wheaton building.
And also, if I might add, we have reduced our footprint over time. We first started out in '96 with 28 different servers, in addition to all the computers and such in the department for operations.
I appreciate. I don't want to interrupt. It was it's kind of a simple question. It's a much broader answer that probably on my other committee on Geo we could talk about. But it is something that I have brought up, and I do look forward to continuing the conversation because I do think we're actually wasting money on technology. And while I totally appreciate the idea of the integrity of the department and the integrity of the system, I think that everybody clings so hard to their individual situation that they do. And in terms of the enterprise fund versus the non-enterprise fund, I view that as an accounting question, not a finance integrity of enterprise versus ordinary taxpayer dollars. It's just a question of cost containment and how you account it on the balance sheet, which is not irregular at all. And in terms of disaster recovery, you're in a building with other people, so presumably if there's a disaster recovery need, which is a huge expense, as you well know, that you generally don't need except when you need it desperately. And so there's tremendous cost saving, I think, in particular on disaster recovery. If the building is, compromised for technology purposes, it's likely to be compromised for everybody. Now, every department may have different needs and different hours and different roles, but I think there is tremendous opportunity there, and I think this is an area where we need to be much more comprehensive. It's not specific to DPS. So we don't need to talk further about it. We can follow up and bring it up at Geo. I was kind of looking for a yes, but we're not looking to share, but I appreciate it. On the condo permit, I'm really glad you said that. I understand there's going to be a cost implication, but those fees, when we learned about them, and I did a little bit of research into it, seemed unnecessarily punitive for volunteers. And so I appreciate the fact, and I think it demonstrates your willingness to look into some of these things. That wasn't your fault. I think that was this was a policy decision that was made that you were implementing, which is not on you. That's on us as policymakers. But the fact that we're able to look at it, or willing to look at it, or now going to come back to us because the thought was well intended, but the practice is unnecessarily punitive. I personally appreciate that. So just quickly, we're talking about enterprise, and even though it's not technically required as an enterprise, it's treated as such. How do overages work? How do shortages work? How do we account for that? What happens if you don't have the money to perform the functions? Do you come back to us for a supplement? Because legally, you're not an enterprise fund. We just treat you as one. So how does that work?
So before I answer specifically, I want to be clear on one thing too. So we are set up as an enterprise fund, not legally mandated as an enterprise fund. That said, there's still a legal framework within which we have to work. So we work hard to assure that our fees relate to the services that we provide, because if we don't, they could be challenged as being an illegal, improper tax. So once we are operating and charging fees as an enterprise fund, we have a legal obligation as it relates to how we set our fees. So I want to be clear on that. If we, it's interesting when you look at the history of the DPS fund and our reserves. There have been years where, and there were many, many years where the department did not make enough to cover its costs or its reserves. In some cases, it was simply the reserves. In other cases, it was the costs. And in the cost scenario, there were many years where the department, the general fund, subsidized the costs of the department, because truly we do need to be ready to serve. The last thing you want to have happen is, be in a recession. Last thing you want to have happen is be in a recession, but then not be poised to come out of a recession, not to do the things that you need to do to dig ourselves out and put ourselves in the most advantageous position. So when the general fund has subsidized the department to cover its costs, that has been kept on a book and over time on the books, and over time the department would then pay back the subsidized deficits, if you will. Then there were times, and not because there was a wild fluctuation in rates, but because of the way the rates were applied. We lifted a cap one year, and suddenly the pendulum swung the other way, and we had these excess accumulations of revenues, which was why we did the comprehensive fees study, by the way. And we had way too much reserves. We looked at it. We knew that there was an unintended consequence for the way our fees were hitting a certain area of our constituents, a certain area of our applicants, which was the wood frame buildings. So we changed that. But the excess reserves, you don't just pay it back, but the Wheaton building was coming up, so we set it aside to pay for our share of the Wheaton building. So the simple answer to your question is if we don't have enough money, then yes, we would have to potentially get a supplemental appropriation out of the general fund to cover expenses, or we'd have to cut. And because really the bulk of our operating budget is staff, that's where we would feel the cuts. It would be our staff.
Great. Okay, last question, I promise, to my colleagues here. And if you don't know the answer, it's fine to say we don't know, and we'll get back to you very quickly. But what percentage approximately are residential construction permits, residential permits related to residential housing of your overall budget, new housing?
Sorry, what is, could you rephrase the question? I'm not sure I understood
For fee
it.
revenue. So you largely function on fee revenues.
I get the fee part of it.
Right.
Are you talking about single family versus multifamily?
No, I'm talking about single family, multifamily, throw it all in the same bucket. Like a residential building permit.
Okay, so
across the
residential
board.
building permits, our building permits, we really speak in very basic terms. A residential permit is a single-family permit, whether it's detached or attached. A commercial permit is everything that's not a single-family permit. So that would be multifamily and this is not the way our nomenclature, this actually comes from the Codes Council. It's the way it's in the
Okay, there's no difference between an office
So-
building and a residential multifamily building. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
So multifamily is considered
All
to be
right, so
commercial.
from multifamily and residential, what is the total percentage of your budget for new housing, or for new buildings?
Our projected revenues, we can give you the percentage. It is a much smaller percentage than from the commercial permit fees. So,
Good morning, Hadi Mansouri, Chief of Operation. The residential, if you categorize this detached and townhouses, is that what you were looking for? The townhouses, then it gets into two categories. 3-story lower is under the residential code. 3-story townhouses above is under commercial code.
but
It gets a little bit
All right,
complicated.
I'll follow up with you
We'll get you the
after this hearing. I think that the point that I was trying to figure out is whether or not we've gotten huge changes to expectations on multifamily residential, which I think speaks to the need, and we've talked about it before, that we need a lot more multifamily residential. We need more housing. And I'm curious as to how the finance projections factor into your projections based on how much money you expect to make from permits, because we're basically expecting how much permits are coming in here, because that's how your budget is largely figured out. But
So-
I twisted myself into a pretzel, it seems like, so we can follow up
answer
with
it.
you. Okay.
We can answer that, but
You're
it's all.
concerned that if multifamily residential is slowing down as much as it seems to have been slowing down, are we prepared for a loss in revenue? Is that?
Correct. And two, whether or not the left hand is talking to the right hand. Whether or not the same folks who, from our finance, said, hey, you should cut the CIP expectations, the spending affordability guidelines in half over the next 6 years, because we expect there to be absolutely no more housing based on what we had anticipated effectively, to, is that being reflected in our permitting services, which is based on partially those fees for those buildings. And so that it's a two-part question. One is, if that's true, what do we do in terms of the shortage? Is that going to, this is the oxygen that you breathe. This is the oxygen that our economy breathes and our families breathe in terms of their housing. And then number two, whether or not we are reflecting that so that when we're making projections and making decisions in one area of the budget and with one department that we are doing that across the board with the other impacting agencies, of which you would be a primary one.
So if the committee is interested, Dennis Hetman is here, and from finance, and we work with him, and he does a regression analysis on our fees, and it's all of our fees.
I've got to say, I love regression analyses, but I don't know that my colleagues will indulge me in that. So
That would be a digression analysis, I think.
I think maybe we should save that for another day. But I'd love to follow up on those specific questions. So perhaps our staff and your team. And by the way, I didn't mention before, but you are terrific, and we noted you. But your deputies are also terrific and extremely responsive in the short time that I've been here in terms of our questions and needs that constituents have. And so I just wanted to note that to your deputies, who really are terrific. And I am hopeful we're not going to hear about any other departures from the department, because we certainly couldn't afford that.
All right, Councilmember Chawando.
And I'll briefly add to the regression analysis. The third, I think, leg of the stool, also we want to know, in addition to what Councilmember Friedson said and Councilmember Reamer said, is since we've made changes, are we seeing, when we looked at the fee structure, when we've reduced waiting time, like, have we seen upticks or downticks? What are the actual trends, and has consumer behavior changed? I think that's the other thing that we want to factor in too. Are we discouraging or encouraging? Are there policies or changes that we could make that can make it easier? And I know that's hopefully part of this whole for business review. So that's, I think, a third piece of it.
If I may, we do look at that, and we have looked at that, and our fees are pennies out of a project on a per square foot basis. When you're all is said and done, I mean, it is a very small amount of an overall project cost. That said, our fees are not what drives whether a permit will go forward or not go forward, certainly not as it might relate to, I want to say this the right way, as it might relate to whether somebody's going to do a commercial project or not do a commercial project. That will not have an impact on it.
And I'm not even necessarily talking about commercial. As we were going down residential, I think fees and wait times and those things could be much more of a big deal for a homeowner who's embarking on a project, for example. And I'm just wondering if, I'd be more curious in that, since we're talking about there's less housing going to be built. Obviously, it matters in the commercial space, but I'm also concerned about this, I'd also want to know on the residential side, on the homeowner side, even those types of changes.
So that was one of the benefits about the way we restructured our rates, because our rates on the residential side, I thought, were regressive. In the sense that the smaller houses, the more modest homes were fairly well subsidizing some of the bigger homes. And so by going to a per square foot rate, it became a more fair, balanced approach to fees. And the cost of our permits for the smaller houses actually went down. So, which I think was beneficial. In terms of doing housing, alterations, that's our bread and butter as well, and we try to get most of those, many of those are walk-through permits. So people come in, there is a fee associated with it. It is not a big fee, but they walk out with their permit, and we, like many other permitting agencies, operate that way.
Let me just put in a plug for the estimating ability of this regression that Dennis Heitman did. On circle page 7, you can see what the budget estimate was in 19 and what the current estimate is in FY19. Out of $42 million, it's about $400,000 off. That's really good estimating. Now, they do the estimates, I believe, are made on total expected revenues, but again, on circle page, you get the revenues by individual source. And within that, sediment control is expected to be very much down. And that's where you get the really big projects. So at least in terms of the really big projects, this is expecting lower amounts for that. So in that sense, they're conforming.
Thanks, Jeff. And to Mr. Friedson's point is absolutely the two hands are talking. We're doing this forecast based off the exact same data that we're doing impact taxes. And when we began this process with DPS, there were swings or differentials of almost $20 million in terms of the expected revenue. We have gotten those down to less than 1%. The math works, and we break it up into each individual component of revenue and look at the trends and forecast them out for each. And we are using the same impact tax data that we use for that forecast here, and they absolutely coincide.
And we also look at it, we ourselves look at it line item by line item, and we look at when we know there are large projects that are coming in a certain area, we let Dennis know that too, and we're constantly working together to make sure we are getting as close as we can.
But the council felt that the executive's impact tax projections were unduly pessimistic. And our proposed CIP is going to be different than what you sent us.
So there's a major impact that we are seeing, no pun intended. As we all know, the impact taxes were completely restructured with the subdivision staging policy. That had one impact, but the bigger impact that we're seeing, the trend, if you will, and Dennis can speak to it, but we feed him the information, so is the fact that when the decision was made that a project that has 25% MPDUs will also forego impact taxes on the market rates. That has resulted in several projects now they're changing how they're approaching their project, and they're coming in, which on the one hand, you're getting more of MPDUs, which of course is good, but on the other hand, you're foregoing revenues, and for one project, it's about $4 million. That's just one project. So putting it into perspective.
Now, we have legislation that I've introduced to tweak this program, and we're going to have a broader conversation about the program and, kind of really get into it and figure out, and that's going to be a GO, so I believe, right, Jeff?
Yeah, it's not
joint.
Yes, it needs to be joint. Good, I agree. We're going to do that jointly because it's fundamentally a housing strategy, but we're gonna dive into that. I mean, to me, anyway, I won't get into it now, but we acknowledge your observation, Andrew.
I just want to clarify, how many projects total have there been that have qualified for that have come to you with a permit? Pulled the permit.
So there's one project, the Elms, that has come in. They came in for one permit. They paid their taxes early for one phase of their project and then held off on the other phases. And the other phase, the first phase was a $1.4 million payment, I believe. Then the law changed. The balance for the rest of their project would have been over $3 million. So that now they qualify for that $3 million credit when they come in for the permits for this. And this is a real project. They've asked for a refund on the 1.4, which we have turned down because we, on the basis.
I don't want to interrupt, but that's 3 phases of one project. Are
That's
there any
one
other
project.
projects that
There
have come
are
to you with the
others,
permit?
too.
I think
I don't recall the
there's
exact
only
number.
a few. There's
a few of them.
only a few, and I just
So-
I just want to make sure that we're clear on what we're talking about here. The very ambitious projections, which I appreciate, were 30 million of the 120 million, actually 133.4 million, I believe. I don't have the numbers in front of me. 133.4 million cut because finance, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but finance actually expect a slight uptick in recordation tax. I haven't looked at these numbers for a while, but I'm pretty sure it was 133.4 million. 30 million of that was for this program. So I think it's important.
That's a good point, Dave.
It's really important that we're talking about a handful of projects where this has been blown up into being the reason for $120 million cut. It was not. It was one small piece of a $120 million cut. The reason for the $120 million cut, we might disagree on the number, but we agree on the cause, and the cause is that there isn't enough building. That we're not building enough housing, particularly not enough multifamily, that there isn't enough, new housing in general, and so that is what is causing a lack of impact taxes. And so it is a completely counter narrative to what many people have said, which is we have too much housing and we need to have less housing. The reality is we have dramatically less housing than even the housing that this council and the prior county executive and the current executive's finance team had projected over the next 5 or 6 years. That is, we can disagree on what the numbers should be and what that reduction is, but the reality is there is absolutely no doubt that the cause of this is we all expect a significant reduction in new housing builds, and that has dramatic implications in our economy and dramatic implications in the cost of housing for our residents because the population is not shrinking. And so I just think it's important. We frequently hear this idea that the cause is this 25% MPDU, and it's kind of become the pinball. Or the punching bag, so to speak, of the reason for the cuts. But there's the main reason why revenues are down is because there isn't enough building and there isn't enough economic activity, period,
Okay.
full stop.
So I'm not saying it is the cause, it is a cause. There are others as well, and I don't want it to be.
A small cause of a much larger issue.
Let me, if I may, and you're asking a question about multifamily housing starts. I'm not prepared to answer that question. You were also asking a question about why impact taxes are down. That's one piece. I wanted to point out definitely that law has an effect. There's others though too, and I want to be clear on this. There have been other changes. There have been many changes over the past decade to how the impact tax laws work. One of them has to do with on senior housing. That's an area that we actually do see a fair number of multifamily projects coming in. Senior housing. The rate for senior housing has changed dramatically over the past however many years in recent amendments to impact tax law. So it's not just one thing. There are many things, and it's been, as it relates to impact taxes, some of them may be new starts, some of it is sort of the death by 1,000 cuts, because there have been many good policy changes that have been made, but the cumulative impact, no pun intended, is that you're seeing diminished revenues.
In the 25% MPDU law, do you still get permit fees for your department? Are those waived?
No. We actually do not have the authority to waive
Yep.
fees.
No, I got it. Thank you.
All right. We're going to take all this up when we take up the legislation, and there's lots to talk about.
You do have a recommendation to approve the budget as submitted. You have, still, I would like the committee to determine if it wants to see the revenue, the increased fee resolution back to committee after the council's public hearing.
All right, let's do that.
Excuse me?
Oh,
Do you want it?
yes.
You
Oh,
do
I don't
want
think
it
we
back?
need to come back to the committee. No, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Take it straight to council.
And just to note, there was a slight change in personnel. They changed term contract employees to being on the list of personnel complement, and there was another change in accounting where 0.75 of a person was being accounted against this department. That went away. So the net change was 2.25 additional full-time equivalent employees.
Saw that. Okay, good. That's fine. Me and my colleagues.
Approved?
Approved. All right, spirited dialogue to be continued. That's good, it's fine. All right, Mr. Gene Smith.
Good morning, or is it after? Nope, we're still morning. So we have a few CIP amendments that the executive has recommended this year under the economic development general portion of the CIP. The committee will look at two of them today, the White Flint and White Oak CIP projects. And I'll also note that Mr. Fosselman, the White Oak and White Flint coordinator, is here today as well to answer questions if the committee has it. The third project that's been recommended for amendment is the Wheaton one, which we heard a little bit about during Department of Permitting Services, mostly due to the reduction from Permitting Services' current revenue. So given the committee's recommendation, that will be noted for the Wheaton CIP project on April 23rd with the GO and PHED committee. So with that, I'll go ahead and give an overview of the White Flint project, let the committee talk about that one,
Yeah.
and then we'll move on to the White Oak. So the White Flint project has a reduction of $371,000 over the 6-year CIP due to the retirement of the White Flint coordinator position. So it's reflecting that reduction.
And why is that position proposed for retirement?
Well, the person retired
So it's
from the
not being
position,
refilled?
and so it's being filled 50% by the White Oak coordinator, which is why it's not a full FTE reduction. So it's got a reduction of a half an FTE in fiscal 20. And then, as noted in the packet, there'll be a 0.2 FTE added back to it for a planning coordinator in the county executive's office. So with that said, the recommendation from the executive is to reduce the PDS cost element, because that's where all of the cost for this project is. The other transportation projects related to White Flint are in different projects. This is just a coordination project. And so it contains a lot of staff elements, not only in the county executive's office, but also in finance. There's 1.2 FTEs in finance to help for whenever bonds are issued and related to that special taxing district. So again, there's a question related to why are they not?
Yeah, like
So
is the workload reduced? How is it going to be met?
Hi.
Hi, Tina. Oh, you're not on yet. There you go.
Oh, thank you, sorry. Tina Benjamin.
You're on, but the mic was.
Got it, thank you. Tina Benjamin in the county exec's office. So I think that as you all were speaking earlier about things not moving quickly enough in certain areas, well, what we're seeing in White Flint and White Oak is the movement not going as fast. With Mrs. Met's retirement, we looked at it and said we felt that one individual could deal with the implementation of both of these areas at the same time for the time being. In the meantime, I'm also, of course, special projects. So even though I'm not charging any of my time, I'm working very closely with Mr. Assant and Mr. Fosselman in the implementation of these efforts. So it might not reflect on the budget numbers, but we are clearly putting forth, as you saw yesterday, as all of you were in the White Flint session at various points in time, our intentions to really make these plans come to fruition.
So are you saying that, like, when you look at Pike and Rose, you see there's a lot of buildings up now, but that was basically kind of the first phase, and there isn't as much intended for the next couple of years, and that's why it's going to slow down?
Well, no, our coordination efforts are continuing. But again, the pace at which things have been moving forward in the private sector, you're talking about Pike and Rose, the implementation for White Flint covers a lot more than one property owner. So we're still working on everything, yes.
Well, again, what I'm saying is, okay, well, first of all, it's painfully clear that the White Flint Mall site is not moving
Correct.
forward, and there's probably no greater symbol of our current challenges than that visible dirt right next to Rockville Pike. But Pike and Rose is working on a project, and there are cranes on
Correct.
on Rockville Pike. So why don't we need more staff here?
I think that the staff that's working on White Flint is not just in the county exec's office through the White Flint coordinator position. Remember, we've got folks in transportation doing the Western workaround. Finance deals with the taxing district. This is a coordination role. So it was felt that we could take care of two areas with one individual. And it's not a reflection of our intention toward making things move forward. It's just economies of
Gene, what's your
staff time.
analysis here of the workloads?
Well, as you noted in the staff packet, I mean, staff concurs with the current model of having less FTEs in the coordinate, at least in this one project, not as a reflection of the total coordination going on by the county executive for White Flint. And also, I would note that this is an off year, and I think kind of seeing where we're at as the county executive gets his staff and his implementation moving forward, let's see what the biennial CIP recommends for the larger coordination in White Flint. So that's mostly why staff concurs with the executive's recommendation right now to reduce by about a half an FTE for at least for fiscal 20, and then see where we're at when we get fiscal 21 and beyond.
Well, I have some real concerns about this. It's probably not surprising. It's in my district. It's a critical part of my district. We were all at the same meeting for various points. I think this sends the exact opposite message we're supposed to be sending, we should be sending, and we reinforce everything that has not happened. And it looks like we are retreating from an area that I think is one of the most critical economic development areas and should be one of the biggest focuses of the county's economic development strategies. And by taking the person who is supposed to be the point person for this project to help spur that, we are doing the opposite. We're taking them away from that and reducing our efforts and being less present and being less active and sending a message to the business community, to the residents, to everybody who has bought in on the vision of the Pike District, and saying that we don't expect anything to happen. And so we are going to reduce our staffing capacity there. And I fundamentally think that is a bad idea. Frankly, I think White Oak is similar. It's less of a focus for me as a district council member because it's not in my district, but I'm not sure it sends a great message to White Oak either. But particularly in White Flint, everything we're hearing is concern from the business community that twofold. One, they're not sure that the market is there, but two, that they don't believe that we are serious about doing the type of infrastructure investments that we need. And if we are ever reinforcing that notion that we have effectively given up, or at least for the time being don't see a need to invest in White Flint, it's by literally reducing our main point person for that. And so I have real strong concerns about the message that this sends, both the philosophical message that it sends and the in practice message that it sends, that if one of your kids is falling behind, you don't reduce what they're doing, you increase what they're doing. And we should be sending additional focus on something that is critical to the county's economic development, to spur it, to help it, to figure out what's going on, to see what we can do in terms of investment and focus and change, rather than retreating from it, where we'll never get to a solution if we're walking away from something that is so important to the county's economic future. I'm just curious, speaking of that, it seems to me DMETS was not, sitting around not doing anything. And this, is a reflection that she didn't have enough to do because there isn't enough development activity happening. I don't see that. I'm glad Mayor Fosselman is here. I've seen him at a lot of meetings in White Flint. I know he's splitting his time and doing the best that he can. But my sense before DMETS left, who, by the way, I think did a terrific job in that role and is widely respected by everybody, from residents to civic activists and advocacy folks to the business community. And I think we need to replace DMETS. It's hard enough to replace DMETS with any full-time person, and I love Pete Fosselman. It would be hard enough to fill her shoes, but to fill her shoes with a part of a person it's not fair to that person, and it's not fair to this community, and it's not fair, I don't think, to the county's economic development. So was the White Flint Partnership consulted? Were Friends of White Flint consulted? Did you discuss with them, what interface they were having? Was who was consulted in making the decision to think that there wasn't enough to do for DMETs, and so that we should have a part-time person?
So again, can I go back? I think that, respectfully, if I could just put in my thoughts, is that the reduction in the time doesn't reflect the reduction in the county's intention. So while this is now a part-time position, I'm picking up a little bit more and getting more involved in White Flint. Our Economic Development Corporation will be talking about some things during their budget review, things that they would like to do with respect to White Flint. So even though this particular position is half-time, I think it's being compensated by others that aren't charging their time against the White Flint redevelopment PDF that are getting more involved.
All right, I still have strong concerns about it, but I'll leave that at face value for now. I do have, and I can hold off, but I do have questions specifically about the tax district and about the finance FTEs. But I can ask them now, or I can wait, depending on what you'd like to do, Mr. Chair.
In the White Flint?
Yeah, related to this.
I think it's fine to just, let's focus on White Flint, whatever questions you have.
So that is, I mean, I continue to have strong reservations about that. I think that it sends the absolute wrong message. I think that, with all due respect, and I appreciate the time that you're spending and others are spending, I don't see that as the same. And I think that, budgets are priority documents, and you send a message with the staffing that you put and the resources that you put towards different priorities. And I think this sends the wrong message to the folks in the Pike District who are continuing to work hard to try to spur things along and want to see the change to the idea that development isn't happening as quickly as folks would like. But I do have some questions about the 1.2 FTEs in finance. My understanding from staff and what you just said is that there's 1.2 FTEs in finance, and it's being charged against the special taxing district in White Flint.
Correct. The CIP includes 1.2 FTEs for the special taxing district.
Yeah, and that's to issue bonds that haven't been issued? Is that correct?
That's staff's understanding, Alan.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted role, and one that an argument could be made is considerably more than 1.2 FTEs right now, as we're venturing to really fix White Flint from a tax standpoint, a debt issuance standpoint. Also, there were a lot of development assumptions that were made at the outset that simply haven't materialized. We have to look at on an iterative basis and continuously recalibrate what is the pipeline of development that will be occurring, what is the debt needed to structure that, and it is a constant iterative process of calculating that and working with multiple financial advisors to make sure that those totals can support the district.
That's a lot to unpack of what that means, and the fact that these are, I mean, to me, that's what finance does. And I'm just curious, the idea that we would be charging FTEs to the special tax district, is that common? Do we charge, does finance charge FTEs to other urban districts? Does it charge FTEs to Wheaton for their infrastructure projects and debt? Does it charge Silver Spring? Does it charge Bethesda? Does it charge White Oak? Is this a common, I mean, because it sounds to me like those are folks who are doing their jobs.
Right.
Just to be honest.
No, I can get an answer to you for that. But yeah.
So that's, but it's to your knowledge right now. I mean, it seems to me it's a pretty obvious thing. We either frequently charge against tax districts, or we frequently don't charge against tax districts for people in finance doing their iterative processes in order to do what finance does, which is make fiscal and economic projections to help us do it. And I value the work that you do. I really do, and I think you have some terrific folks. I just have some real questions about charging, folks who are doing their jobs in one department. I mean, we don't have, that is an uncharacteristic thing to me to do just generally in county government, for people in county government who are doing their jobs to be charged against effectively an urban district. That is,
It's a little different.
I have never heard of that, and I have some real concerns with that, honestly, because I think that we're cutting out from the tax district for things that other folks aren't paying for in the same way.
Sure. I mean, the White Flint Special Taxing District is the only special taxing district we have right now under the transportation kind of, as a transportation special taxing district. And it is my understanding, our staff's understanding, I mean, that they were charging finance because at some point in time we were going to issue bonds. I mean, as the Circle 2 notes, I mean, there's an anticipated debt issuance in fiscal 19. Whether that occurs or not is up for.
But those are two different things.
Right.
You know, on the one hand, saying, okay, we need 1.2 people because this is a unique transportation special tax district that was set up, that everybody bought into, that was a different way of doing things, which I think is a good model. Unfortunately, hasn't materialized because there isn't as much development as we would have liked. Whether that's fair or unfair, because no one else really has to do it for that type of stuff, to issue bonds for projects in their district, I could argue that really it shouldn't. Nobody should be charged against that special tax district. But I'm willing to concede that point since it's a unique situation. But to then extrapolate those 1.2 FTE, position and staff time and whatever against the tax district to the general job that finance has as it relates to White Flint, to me, is inappropriate and unfair and inequitable, and doesn't treat White Flint the same as we treat every single other urban district in the county. And I think that should be removed. And I think that any charge against the special tax district, if there are in terms of, eventually expecting to pay back from the Pike District, from White Flint, from that special tax district to finance for that position, should be eliminated, because it is, unless you show me that we do this for infrastructure projects in every other part of the county, which I'd be stunned, then I don't think that we should be doing it in White Flint. Because they agreed to be taxed. Right, I mean, this is what this is based off of. This is a community that said, hey, we will accept an additional tax for infrastructure to spur things. Nobody else does that in the same type of way for transportation infrastructure. They get transportation infrastructure as part of, the regular CIP. They don't have to pay back for staff time.
Okay,
that happens.
Can I dialogue with you a little bit?
Sure.
So this tax district was created some number of years ago. There was kind of a broader bargain that was reached about how we were going to do it, and
I'm okay with that.
And I think this was always this is not a change, right? This is what we had always.
No, what my point is that
this a change?
No. My point is, again, if I were here when the special tax district was being created, I would probably have made the argument, whether it would be futile or not, I don't know, but that finance does this work of issuing bonds in every area. Bonds get issued for infrastructure. That's what happens. And just because we're having a special taxing district specifically target infrastructure in this area, I'm not sure that we should be paying back finance for that work. It's a core function of what finance does. That notwithstanding, that decision was made. I'm willing to abide by that. What I am uncomfortable with, and what I do believe is a change, is the idea that not for issuing bonds, the 1.2, but the idea that we're going to keep that in because finance has had to do other work in order to figure things out and do an iterative process to do their projections based on White Flint, when no other place, that does more work or less work for finance charges that.
Though, Bethesda PLD pays for a lot of services in Bethesda. There's not really a lot of services.
Does finance, do we,
paid for
the iterative processes that finance does the PLD pay finance back for that? Does your budget get funded by the PLD?
I don't know the answer to that, but
it's not just finance, though. Imagine all the work that the Bethesda district is paying for in Bethesda, all the staff, all the contributions to BOP. There's no analogous
right, but
services provided in White Flint, as far as I'm aware. So this is
correct. So for not the taxes aren't being paid in, and the services aren't being rendered. That seems legitimate. That's what's happening. What is different here is, based on those two things not happening, finance is charging against the special taxing district for services that they're providing as a function of their job, as a function of their role in county government, critical role, by the way, in county government, but to every other urban district and every other part of the county. That's what's different. That, to me, is inappropriate. It's inequitable, it's different, it's unfair, and it shouldn't be done.
So to help out, I mean, staff, I guess the question would be would Mr. Friedson like staff to work with OMB and the executive staff now to reflect any updates to the staffing charges for the for the amended PDF, or was that something we can work on for the biennial PDF to make sure that the finance staff charges are accurately reflecting their time spent for the special taxing district versus other items?
Well, I mean, if my colleagues are indulging me, I would say that we should work to get it out of, being charged. I think, in terms of timing, I yield to you if this is just, a debt that is staying on the books, against the special taxing district of, needing to pay back for the 1.2 finance, and we can, address it as the new PDFs come through for the next CIP, then I'd be okay with that, but I want to make sure that we do it because I don't think that it's appropriate.
Okay, so I think that there was always anticipated to be a lot of revenue coming into this through this special taxing district and a lot of work that was going to be done, and it's a little more glaring to have the staff work billed to the taxing district when there isn't a lot of activity that's coming. I think that's kind of the sore thumb here that's sticking out. If there was a lot of projects and everything was moving forward and lots of bonds being floated and so forth, I would imagine that most people, including those who are paying for this, would say, this is good and make sure it's getting done in a timely manner. I hear what you're saying, and I don't think we need to change the deal that we struck before, but I think the frustration that I have is that we're not seeing more activity in White Flint, which is tied to all kinds of other macro problems. The developers aren't going to put up the buildings because the job base isn't strong enough, and the job base isn't strong enough for a whole lot of reasons, and so no one's renting the units at the prices that justify construction costs and things like that. But let's hear from Mr. Dewando for a moment. We can keep this going. On this topic, I assume yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hi, Tina and everybody. A lot was said, but on the couple questions, and Pete, maybe I'll need you too, and I know we'll go to White Oak in a second, but I know there's been a lot of discussions, and I take at face value and in good faith that you, the county executive, your entire team understands the seriousness and urgency of the need we have for economic growth and development in the county. Obviously, in White Flint is on top of that list, just like I would say White Oak's on top of that list too. But it's obviously an important area. And I also take it face value that it's possible to care about something and make it more people's jobs. And I think that's a fair, if I understand the way you're characterizing it, it's that even though this is going from 1 to 0.5 and Pete's going to be splitting his time, that the county executive, you, Mr. Fletcher, I'm presuming, correct, many others are going to, this is part of their work stream and will be part of their overall activity and goal and focus. Is that a fair characterization?
Thank you, Councilman, for articulating that better than I articulated it.
No
but
problem.
yes, it is by no means a reflection of a diminution of effort. It's just we are having more individuals involved in the White Flint. And again, I think that as a result of yesterday's discussion, that there will be more involvement on the part of our Economic Development Corporation as well in terms of how to jumpstart some things in that community. And yes, it continues to be a major priority for the county executive.
And obviously, we're going to have the departure of the head of the Economic Development Corporation, which obviously is another issue that we have to deal with. But it's good to hear they're going to be involved. I think we just, I do share the concern that we need to be showing continual momentum and focus, and I fully am okay with you saying, hey, more people care about this, not less, and and we need to see that in the activity that continues. I know there was one meeting yesterday, and my staff was able to be there, and let's keep it going, and please keep in touch with us. I'm concerned about not only White Flint, but White Oak and our other areas, and how fast or slow, rather, that some of these things are going. I think we need to be signaling to the business community, we need to be signaling to our residents, we need to be signaling to the public that we take these things very seriously and that it's a priority. And I think the way to do that is to show progress and to come back and more communication, not less, and more dialogue. And I'd like, our committee to have a session on this at some point.
White Flint?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and White Oak, and take these up. But I appreciate your point. I take it at face value, and I'm glad to hear that more of you are digging in on this and making it a part of your work stream.
And I think what you will see as an outcome of yesterday's conversation was more continuous meetings between all the players, public, private, all the groups that we talked about yesterday that really need to be involved in this discussion about how to move things forward.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Friedson.
Thanks. And I think it's important. There are a lot of groups in White Flint that have a lot of people at the table. And so as we think about this, and I missed the second half of that meeting, as you know, to come back here to the council. But let's not reinvent the wheel. I mean, we have White Flint Partnership, we have the implementation, we have Friends of White Flint. I mean, there are existing groups that are literally set up for this specific purpose to coordinate. And so I would hope that we aren't, that we are getting the right people in the room and that we're having these conversations, but we aren't creating new groups with new folks or some of the same folks. If anything, a half FTE and expecting that person to go to 5 different. I mean, I went to 3 meetings in a row at White Flint with like 80% of the same people, and so we don't need a new group in White Flint. We need the groups that we have to have the commitment from everybody who are sitting at the table to actually move the needle. That's the public sector on our end, and that's the private sector as well. And so that to me, that's what we really need. So this isn't a disagreement. It's just a shared goal of being able to move the ball forward. I'm hopeful that we can, rather than reinventing the wheel, think about how we, take what we currently have and make sure that it's as productive as possible and moving the ball forward. Because I think of any place in the county, White Flint and the Pike District are set up really well for this. We already have the buy-in. Everybody, this is one of the rare places in Montgomery County where the property owners and development community and the residents and the advocacy community have all bought into the same vision of what they would like to see. There isn't a lot of opposition to that. It's a question of how do we bring everybody together to realize the vision, and how do we ensure that there's investment from the private side and the public side, frankly, on the infrastructure side to make that happen. Just quickly on this, and I'll close. So the 1.2 FTEs, my understanding is there's a $55,000 charge for planned studies and coordination. And I'd love to we don't have to talk about it now, but I'd love to get our office specific information of exactly what those plans and coordination are for the $55,000, exactly where that went. And also the $232,000 in FY20 and 21 that are expected for finance functions and services, and exactly what those look like. I know you talked about them in kind of theoretical terms, which I appreciate. You don't need to share them now, but if you could just send over a memo or some type of documentation to me, just so I could have some understanding of exactly what that would be. And with that, my question to staff, Gene, is what would this look like? Does this have a budget cost? I mean, if we're charging it against the special tax district, it wouldn't seem to me that, it's like out of our left pocket or our right pocket at this point. It's still our money, but is there a change to where that would be? Would this have a budget implication in terms of our process moving forward?
It would if the committee's recommendation is to reflect staff charges in this project more accurately with what's going on with the special taxing district. So if the committee recommends reducing staff charges to this PDF in order to maintain the same equivalent amount of staff time that finance is using, it would go into the finances budget. And so let's say you reduced it by 50,000 because you thought that was an accurate level for the special taxing district. That would increase 50,000 for the special taxing district to use for other means, but you would have to have a corresponding increase of 50,000 in finance to make up for that.
But we would just be, we're
You're
just
right,
be
it's
shifting
right
it
hand
from
to
one
left
pocket
hand,
to the
correct.
other pocket. We'd still be,
In this budget, yes.
So it wouldn't have a budget implication to the overall budget. I just wanted to clarify. It would have an implication from one entity to another entity. Is that
You would need
accurate?
50,000 more dollars of general fund revenue in order to fund anything that you reduced in this PDF.
But how is
Just
it
an
being,
example.
I'm just curious, we're billing the special tax district, but is it being paid out of the special?
The money would remain in the special taxing district. So you have to add money from the general fund.
Is the money actually coming out of the special taxing district now from actual revenues, or is it being billed and to be charged later?
It's coming out of the, and I'll.
There's enough money in the special, there's enough money currently in the special tax district that it's paying that, it's going to pay the $232,000. It's been paying the 1.2 FTE. Is that?
Correct, yeah. In terms of the special district tax revenue, this year, I believe it's right under 2 million, and staffing charges come directly from that. And that fluctuates each year.
Can we ask another question before we?
Sure.
So to add back a full-time position for the White Flint coordination, what would be involved in that? Right now, we're billing a half-time position.
If you want to increase a 0.5 FTE in this project to have a 1.0 FTE for a White Flint coordinator, is that the question?
Correct.
I'll let
And that would
OMB and
be
finance give
billed
that
to the,
estimate.
that would be billed to the White Flint
Right.
district, and so not a general fund ask, not a reconciliation list.
And could I just ask while you're answering that, is that a contract, are these contract positions, or are they career positions?
You have to put your mic on.
Sorry. So in the past, Ms. Metz, her full salary was charged against the taxing district. So yes, it is a contract position, term contract, yes.
And if we were to, so Pete is doing this work, if we were to add funding so that we could be a full-time position, would that mean that we would add another part-time to support, to do additional work, or what would happen there? Not
I'm
sure.
going to have to go
Don't know.
back and talk to OMB, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And could I just ask, how long are the term contract? Is that what's the term? What's the term currently for in the incumbent role? And she's sitting back there, hi, Pete. And what would be, just as a standard, if we hired a new, either part-time or a full-time, how long would that term contract be? Or is that case by case?
I think it's case by case. Again, it's something OMB would have to answer.
Where does the money come from? I just want to be clear on that point.
The money for the staffing?
Yes.
It's charged
tax-
against the taxing district.
Right,
So
so-
you see that individual
Got it.
charge,
So
yes.
it wouldn't be to your point, it wouldn't be on our reconciliation list.
This proposal is not on the reconciliation list, which is to make the part-time position funded by the taxing district full-time. The other issue we've talked about is to reduce the charge that finance has to the
Right,
special
so
taxing
that's a
district.
different issue.
That requires general funds to compensate for what's not being charged to the taxing district.
That's correct.
So
the residents that are paying into the taxing district are going to pay for the increased FTE.
Correct.
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 Slow nod, but is that okay?
Well, I just want to clarify, from the funds they are already paying, the position will be funded. So it's not like if you go from a half to a full, that will cost $75,000 with benefits, and so there are 100,000 people paying in, so they each pay 75 cents more. They're already paying their buck in taxes, and rather than it sitting in an account or being charged by finance, it's going to go to this position.
Or being used for some economic development activity or for some other purpose, but it's not going to increase the amount but it would redesignate some of that funding towards another purpose. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's
That's
expending.
correct. So the
Expending.
special taxing district by policy and law right now is 10% of the general fund tax rate, whatever the council will set this year for fiscal 20. And so that's the amount that they're paying, that the businesses, because it's mostly a business, commercial businesses that are paying the tax. I think most residential units, even multifamily units, were excluded. Correct. That rate changes every year. They're going to pay that tax regardless. Some of those charges are used here in this PDF. Some of those charges are used other places for certain transportation projects. Another thing I think staff will note is that this PDF is a little unique in that it's a coordinating project. It doesn't actually have a capital project related to it, which I think is part of the challenge. Does the council and the executive believe the best place to demonstrate commitment is through a PDF, a project description form like this, or is that just more of a general operating expenditure issue? But if you increase by 0.5 FTE to say have a full-time position for a coordinator in this, it would just be charged against the special taxing district if it was done through this project.
Okay.
So I think we could do more in White Flint. So I would support a additional
Second.
0.5 FTE, and whether that is, Pete doing that full time or adding a second half-time, that'll be up to the executive branch in consultation with the property owners that are paying in, and that's a good dialogue to have. But it just seems like we could do more there, and more help would be better than less. And unless there's opposition to doing this from the district, I think it'd be more resources to support our goal of building.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be totally fine with the executive branch having a conversation with the White Flint Partnership, and if they disagree, then not moving forward. But I think that we should pursue moving forward. I mean, the White Flint Partnership was set up to I think about these types of questions of how we spur and development and what we do and what it looks like. And this position was created to be the point person for those efforts. And so if they have strong feelings that they don't want a full-time person, which would surprise me, but then I'd be okay with you telling us we're mistaken. But if not, then, I think we ought to definitely be moving forward.
Yeah, and that was going to be my point. Obviously, you want to ask the people who are paying the tax what they think would be most efficient, and I'm sure they like you, Mr. Fosselman, so I don't know what that'll mean ultimately if there's another person hired. But Tina, do you have anything to add as far as the utilization? And I will just say, before you answer that, I would still want everyone to be involved because we still need a full court press. Even if you get this next person, I still think the Economic Development Corporation, you, the county executive, we all need to be pushing. So don't take this to mean you're off the hook.
That's a good point. That's an important point.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're going to take on more responsibility for this. I think that's very helpful because you have the experience to move things forward, and we want you to do that.
I think you just turned it off, sorry.
You can just
I'm
leave
sorry.
it on. We're in dialogue.
Okay. So again, Economic Development Corporation and myself, our involvement will be more on the job creation and the attraction of companies, because what we're seeing is that's the piece that's not moving forward right now. The residential has been going up. The transportation improvements are in the ground or are being made. The conference center garage is done. Things are moving. But what's really lacking, and I think this was the point of the conversation yesterday, was the companies that need to move in, the jobs that need to be created. That's the missing piece. And that's where there seems to be more focus, and that's what we're going to be doing in the coming year.
So how about this? How about we have this recommendation for an additional half FTE? We'll talk to the White Flint Partnership. We can ask you, Tina, I think, to talk to the White Flint Partnership, but keep Jean in the conversation. And then if they say, actually, we concur, we don't need the extra half FTE, it's just not a good use of our tax district funds, that's fine. We don't need to finalize this in the council's final budget. But if people say, yeah, we'd like more boots on the ground here, then we can continue with this in the budget.
So
sorry, just real quick. The recommendation I heard from the committee is to add an FTE back, contingent on the
half FTE.
Half an FTE, contingent on the partners' agreement.
Yeah.
I will note that this particular PDF does need to go to the council for final approval
That's
during
what I'm
this
saying.
budget. So I guess we'll.
That's what I'm saying, is can
post-haste.
we resolve this question before, so the full council doesn't have to have some question as to whether this is what we should do or not?
I'll have to leave that to.
I mean, we got some time.
Yeah, we do.
We have some time.
I think the other piece. So what I'll ask OMB to do is we have this PDF. They can create another project description form that includes this half FTE back, so that depending on where the partners are at, we can have one ready to go based on the committee's recommendation at full council.
Okay.
So I appreciate that. I would put the motion on the floor for the other piece of this, which is the finance piece, and whether or not the functions of finance that are beyond what I believe were what was originally intended, which was the issuance of bonds, for that not to be charged against the special taxing district.
Okay, so Dennis, you've said that the work that's happening is more in excess of 1.2 FTEs?
Right now, it ebbs and flows. There's a current to it. But in terms of right now, what substantively needs to be fixed with the district is that we are advancing funds. There's not enough revenue coming in, and the Western workaround is happening. Ground has been broken. Those roads need to be built. So we need to structure a debt issuance based on a pipeline of deliverable buildings that we have to make sure have the proper square footage, blended rates, comparable rates, and then issue that debt likely in FY20 to make sure, one, that it's sound financially, that we can have the debt rated and it's marketable, and then in terms of it can sustain the district going forward, given the tax rate and the constraints that were set up on this initially simply haven't materialized to the extent that we had hoped they would.
You think they will, you sound uncertain as to whether this is going to happen in FY20 or not.
We're working on it. It again involves multiple financial advisors and making sure that all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and you have to make sure every assumption that goes into that is airtight with respect to the calculations. So that is the intended goal, but we actually have meetings with the second floor this week to discuss that further.
You're saying it's more than a full-time job to do all the work to manage the issuance of debt that you plan to do in FY20 and you expect to do pending some kind of problem.
Correct.
So, I mean, I'm willing to stick with the course that we established when we set up the district based on that response, but I do want to keep my eyes on this. I think you've raised some important points. I do object to, we tend to load up some of these funds with personnel and then we never build as much infrastructure and we sort of peter the money away with personnel. So that's something to be worried about.
The same way that there's more for finance to do when there's less happening, because you're having to cover these shortfalls and then structure it in a way to fix it. So right now, that piece for us has ramped up exponentially, and it is without any question beyond what's being charged there currently.
Okay, so that's the real response to the bears is, look, we're doing far more work than you're paying for in this district. That's what I heard. Mr. Joanda.
Yeah, and that's helpful. So the counter to what you said is if there was a lot of economic activity and things were moving, you wouldn't be as involved.
Precisely. If things were going wonderfully, finance's role in that is minimal. Yeah. When things are not, and those expectations are not being met, we have to figure out the solution to that word problem that has 20 different constraints and make sure it's optimally solved. And that is it's been quite an effort, certainly of late.
Another reason we need economic activity. I mean, that's just another point. But it's good to know, I take you at your word. I know there were some questions about, is this done in other places? I think some answers that you couldn't give right now that I would be curious to have the answers to, but I'm also comfortable with leaving it the way it is.
And I'll just add, let's keep our eyes on this, and if next year this hasn't happened, then I think we might want to change course and just try to build up that infrastructure fund and, to build up over time so we can make some infrastructure investments. And, if the county has to step in, we need White Flint to become our next Bethesda. We need White Flint to grow to pay the bills. This is how we fund our schools and how we fund our parks and our libraries. And Bethesda is kind of reaching its, it is fully in stride, and the opportunity, I think, is now to get a spillover into a new commercial district. But we have to be very supportive of that, and so we don't want to peter away this infrastructure fund with endless personnel charges for something that is really a county objective. This is a county objective to have a successful White Flint district. This is not like just something, oh, you developers, you guys go, have your little sandbox. No, this is about the economic development of this county and tax revenue and good jobs that support families. Not everybody cares about those issues, I understand, but some of us do. So, we want to ensure that White Flint is a success. Andrew.
I appreciate that. Sounds like I'm going to lose this one, but I appreciate that we're going to revisit it next year and we can, put this conversation on the map, because I do think it's an ongoing question, an ongoing conversation, and hopefully we come back a year from now and you say, we need 0 FTEs because the problem has been solved and finance doesn't need to come up with any new iterative processes to figure out how we structure new debt, because the process that we had in place is working, because we have tons of development thanks to the one full-time employee that we have in White Flint who's spurring everything and coordinating everything. Just a quick question. You mentioned the outside financial consultants that have been hired. Were those hired specifically for White Flint to figure out how to restructure the debt to make it work given the new constraints that you're in, or these contracts or consultants that you have for other processes and programs that you have that you've tapped into because they're there?
Well, one, with respect to part of the debt issuance, we use in other capacities, but we have a individual consultant that is solely White Flint that has an expertise in terms of structuring special tax district revenues, amortization assumptions, development assumptions, and making sure that that is properly forecasted and scoped out over multiple year time horizons. So we currently have models that go out 30 years and say, what is the balancing to make sure that the revenues are consistent and this is clean going forward. The issue with finance right now is if it were humming along the way Bethesda was, there's not much work to do. You have the top line revenues to support it. Here, we have to find them elsewhere, and that's a process that involves multiple FAs.
Got it. If you could share that, that person's role and their background and the number of hours that they've done, the work, whatever, within reason, don't recreate anything, but what you already have of
the consultant,
what the consultant specific to the Pike District, White Flint is doing, I'd appreciate with my office. I would appreciate it. So I guess this one is a 1-2 loss for me, but appreciate the indulgence and the fact that we're going to continue looking at this long term.
You think you made a good point. You put a highlight on something, and this will be something we'll keep looking at and working on.
Mr. Chair, if I may take a moment.
Mr. Fosselman.
Thank you. I've heard my name at least a dozen times in the last 30 minutes, and I've kept quiet, sitting in the back hiding because.
But now that the conversation is over, you're ready.
Well,
sounds like me in high school with the girl I wanted to ask dance just as she's walking out the door.
We're still in session. I was hiding in the back because Miss Benjamin is much smarter than I am, but. She's correct. There's been we've restructured internally in terms of a lot of the duties are shared. I mean, Mr. Willis from legal at DOT is here also in case we needed him. He's been an enormous amount of help to me with agreements in White Flint. But one thing that wasn't mentioned is that the two jobs are the same in that I'm coordinating with different departments, with community members, being residents, business owners, property owners, with the county council, and then my coworkers. But they're two different animals. White Flint, the marketing and certain aspects are handled by the regional services director. And then there's also a private firm that's helping with the marketing that was just hired. White Oak, I do all the marketing. I do a lot of the community outreach. There's a newsletter, there's a Facebook page. There are an enormous number of meetings. As you mentioned, there are 4 different committees or 4 groups that work in White Flint. I try to attend all of those meetings as well. And there's only been one instance in the last 3 months that I've picked up both that I couldn't make something and Tina went in my place. So having multiple people working on things, I think, is better than just one person focused on it because it helps us spread out and we have more knowledge and more brain trust to work on the projects. I just think it's the way it's been phrased they're just two different animals completely. And one person at this point, in my opinion, handling the two jobs is sufficient. Now, things may change should the market pick up, there's more interest in building or whatever happens. And that could happen in White Oak, we hope, as well, because White Oak is just important to me as White Flint is.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk about White Oak.
Sounds good. So unlike White Flint, White Oak is a specific project for the Site 2 redevelopment. Most of the funding is the $40 million placed in the expenditure schedule once redevelopment occurs, and that's our share of the master road construction project. So Mr. Austin is here to relay any information related to that. The only the only substantive change in the project is an $80,000 reduction in fiscal 20 to reflect. I'm sorry.
But what about this CIP expenditure schedule? Is that new?
No, that is are you talking about on page 2 of the staff memo?
Yeah.
That's just reflecting the changes that are recommended in this. So I'd like to finish my thought. The 80,000 reduction is the only substantive change because that's reflecting a half reduction for the White Oak coordinator being now split between White Flint and White Oak. The construction expenditure schedule is a net zero change to the project. It just reflects the expectation, I believe, of when the master
Right.
road
Is this
planned
the
roads.
first time we've looked at the CIP item for
No.
White Oak? Did we already take up the change in the White Oak expenditure schedule?
No, that's what's before the committee
That's what's
right now.
before us now. Okay, so this is reflecting the reality that construction is not imminent, and so you're proposing to recognize that with a shift in the dollars. Is that basically what's going on, Greg Austin?
Good morning, Greg Austin, Department of General Services. That's correct. As the staff packet points out, the lion's share of the CIP is related to the $40 million for infrastructure, which is the roadway projects, master plan roadways within the Viva White Oak project. And based on the pace of development, the proposed expenditure schedule reflects that pace of development when we actually anticipate making reimbursements to the developer for our share of the roadway. So they are in engineering right now, engineering those roadways. They are not through park and planning, and presumably would not break ground until they're through park and planning, obviously, for the roadway infrastructure. There's coordination with FDA. The government, federal government, owns FDA Boulevard, and so there's coordination efforts that are ongoing. And of course, the county is completing demolition and cleanup of the Site 2 property, which we sold to GLDC in the fall. So all of those things are happening, but again, the $40 million expenditure schedule has shifted to reflect when we actually anticipate making those reimbursements for the roadway construction costs.
Okay, and we don't own any of that site anymore. We sold it.
The site was transferred in November of 2018.
All right, and since we are not hearing anyone from the partner saying that this is a problem, I presume it's not a problem for them. It doesn't hold them back in any way, and I presume if they wanted to move more quickly somehow, then
certainly
send us
the
an amendment.
appropriation is there, certainly, and if there were any reason to accelerate, we would certainly come back to you. We're anxious to move things forward, and but I would say that this is a 280-acre project, and just based on the county's experience, and Tina and I have been involved for 10 years now. Just the cleanup of Site 2 and all of the things that the county has done on its property, the 100 acres that the county used to own, has taken quite some time.
Where's the budget on the cleanup?
It's in the same CIP project. There.
You look at Circle 3.
We're not quite finished, but under construction.
I believe it's the site improvements and
Site
utilities.
improvements, yeah.
There's $5 million budgeted in fiscal 19.
$5 million budgeted.
Yeah, and we're in the
fiscal
process
19.
of actually providing some updates to our project page, because the buildings are gone at this point, and it's really just a matter of site cleanup and completing the removal of the concrete slabs and foundations out at the site. But that was an obligation of ours under the agreement with GLDC, the development agreement.
And are we on budget?
Oh, we're actually under budget.
Okay.
We had certainly well under the 5 million. The 5 million is a catch-all of several different things. The demolition I'll have total expenditures probably in the next 6 months. We should complete this summer, and then I'll have a full picture of what it actually costs, but well within where we expected it to be.
Question for you, more at a 30,000 foot. If we wanted to focus on bringing a medical school or some kind of educational institution right there to be proximate to FDA and the hospital, would that involve changing, would we have to renegotiate something with the Viva White Oak? Does it fit within their strategy?
Oh, yes, certainly fits within their strategy. Specific to the Viva White Oak project, again, the 280-acre project that we are partners with GLDC, certainly fits within that program. And as part of our development agreement with GLDC, Ivy Squared, you may have heard, is the nonprofit marketing and the entity that is doing the marketing and pursuing opportunities for users of the site. That would be certainly fall within their realm and their wheelhouse of attracting whether it be a medical school or any ideas, but we have a system and a process and an entity set up to receive those inquiries, offers, et cetera. So certainly.
And where are they with a commercial, of their plans, at the outset? What do you know about them investing in commercial development as opposed to residential?
So you'll recall from the development agreement and the conversations with council at that time, there is a residential cap. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in residential all over the county. There always is. The residential cap of 1,000 residential units should suffice in terms of market supply and demand for quite some time. That said, the incentives and the credits against the purchase and the other elements of the deal structure are certainly lean towards commercial development. In other words, the incentives are heavily commercial development rather than residential. We put a residential cap on the deal.
So after they've built 1,000 units, then they have to do 1 million square feet of commercial.
Well, they can't build more
like
than 1,000 units without getting to any commercial, which is what the original concern was. But more so to the county leveraging the value of the 100 acres that was county owned. On one hand, we put a residential cap, so we didn't want to see too much residential. The balance of all of the other incentives incentivize commercial development. So that's the county's part and what the county has done to incentivize that. I don't want to speak for Ivy Square because there's a lot of work that's happening that I'm simply unaware of in terms of implementation. But perhaps we could take that back to Ivy Square and have GLDC provide some sort of briefing for the committee if you're interested on their efforts. And I know that Mr. Smith and I have attended some one-on-ones to that effect, and we'd certainly be happy to coordinate that on our respective ends.
Yeah, I think we ought to do White Oak and White Flint, separately.
We'll get those on the schedule post-budget.
Yeah. Mr. Dwando.
Thank you, and that was going to be a suggestion of mine, so thank you for doing that. I think,
You suggested it.
Yes, earlier. Yeah, I think so, that's right. So just a couple things. I mean, backing up, this prior, I live in this area. I meet with the people all the time. Those of us who live in East County were very excited when the idea for this Life Science Gateway project was we need jobs, we need amenities, we need commercial. We have a lot of housing out there, and I think that, there's that. Obviously, I'm restating concerns you already know, and I've met with GLDC and others, and so I think in this briefing, and Pete or anyone else wants to speak to this, or Tina, I think, we need to, as we're growing as a county, we need to rebalance. We need to create the opportunity for property values to rise everywhere. And so this impacts our schools in many ways, in that, you have overcrowding in some places. I say, Springbrook is under-enrolled, but Walt Whitman's bursting from the seams. Those two problems are related. And if you had people that could work near where they lived and you could get more east to west and north and south, it helps the whole county. And I think White Oak is just as important as any other project that we have in the county for those reasons, for equity and the needs of the residents, but also for relieving pressure on other parts of our need for services in other parts of the county. So I just want to make sure we're all understand that, and I see nodding heads. And so the cap on residential units is great, but you, Mr. Assant, you said without getting to any commercial. I just want to clarify and we could, you know the development agreement better than I. What does that mean? What's the triggers? What are the triggers there?
The council's concern when we deliberated the general development agreement was that there was that it would be an entirely residential community, and we'd never realize any of the commercial development that we intend, the life sciences, the spinoff of FDA, the spinoff of Adventist, et cetera. So until I believe it's 300,000 square feet of commercial is built, that there's a residential cap in place. I'll double check those numbers. It's been a while since I've looked
right,
at.
That sounds right. So the 300,000 square feet. Then there's no longer a cap.
Correct. Yeah. So.
So can I implore you for the future, because I may not be here when they come back, but I am convinced the developer is going to come back and say, "Oh, let us out of the cap. We just, we'll get to the commercial one day." I don't know that they really want to invest in that. I mean, I'm very skeptical.
So am I. Yeah. You won't. If I'm on the PHED committee, and hopefully Mr. Friedson will be there with me.
Back at Mr. Friedson also.
Yeah. No, that would not. I would not want that. So, I think that's important. And then, does anyone know of where that is, other than Starbucks or, obviously the hospital's opening, we're happy about that. I look for, are there things in process? Are there any leads, and where are we with that? And I know we got the hotel and all that, but what?
Well, so initially, I thought that Viva White Oak would come out of the gate first. The 280 acres would be moving forward. In fact, kind of the opposite's happened with the project. People tend to forget we're talking 3,000 acres in White Oak. So the hotel groundbreaking is actually today. The hospital opens in August, which is huge for East County. And Hillendale Gateway, which is sort of across New Hampshire, right there at the Beltway where the old Union College campus is moving full steam ahead. It's a mixed use, 400 plus units, several thousand retail. And then there are talks with the Union College, ATU, with doing a joint project with them next door on the front part of the parcel. Also, the town center is moving. It's a little slower, but it's moving forward, which is huge. They're bringing a major grocery store chain to that area on 29, and that's also going to have about 250 residential units, as well as 4 to 5 different retail, and I believe 2 or 3 will be restaurant pads, which will be nice because it'll complement the little restaurant park that's there where the Panera and Fridays are. And then there's talks by some of the shopping center owners. BF Saul owns the old White Oak Center. They're watching closely. Where the Target shopping center is, they're watching closely. And of course, the Duffy Company is looping back around to New Hampshire, owns where the Hillendale Shopping Center and Safeway are. So there's a lot happening.
But no major life science kind of.
Not to my knowledge.
No leads on that end. That's what I mean. I know the other stuff, which is great, and I think that'll greatly benefit the residents. But other than the hospital, okay, and we can meet offline. And I just, I just think there's a lot to leverage there, and I hope that's as equal as a priority to the last discussion. I think we all need to be in on that as well, and trying to really push getting that anchor tenant with, we made the deal with GLDC, and I know they're working it, but I think we need to be right at the table, and I know you've been working hard at that, Pete.
So one other thing to keep in mind is just the sheer presence and ongoing growth of the Food and Drug Administration, because right now the projections are that there's still another 3,000 jobs in the pipeline, 1,500 new hires, and 1,500 that at some point need to be moved over to the campus. And to be honest with you, every time we turn around, that number keeps going up.
Good.
It's not going down.
Well, let's hope that the current president doesn't cut the need for food and drug regulation.
No, and I think part of it is just the sheer number. They are driven by license fees. So as folks come in with products, that's how they get their revenue, and they base their hiring on that. So as there is more drug devices, medical devices, and pharmaceuticals, even cosmetics, there's more products that they're reviewing. That's going to boost, regardless of any public policies, just that sheer number of what's happening in the private marketplace will end up boosting the activity and the employee counts for FDA.
Mr. Hassan, I saw you kind of reaching. Were you going to say something?
I just wanted to clarify as it relates, because Pete referenced the overall White Oak Science Gateway Master Plan, which is 3,000 acres and change. The residential cap and to the commercial is specific to the Viva White Oak project, to just that 280 acres. So all of the other development that is happening isn't really related to the cap that is specific to that project alone. So I just want to clarify.
Thank you.
And I am concerned about the transportation improvement for the Hillendale Center that's needed at Powder Mill Road in New Hampshire. I understand that there's been some delay in that. Pete, can you give me a very quick update?
Sure. So there are three aspects to that approval. It was put forward by the Duffy companies, approved initially by the Department of Transportation and the State Highway Administration, and it entails a new slip ramp to 495, some traffic calming, and new landscaping to Elkton Drive, where the Coca-Cola plant is, and the new hotel. And then both sides, east and west of Powder Mill Road, for lane improvements, expansion, I believe some signage. It's all trying to work together, the three projects, to help with the traffic issues at the intersection of Powder Mill. For example, the Coca-Cola trucks who come and go at that plant all day long have to make U-turns now. When they come down Elkton Road, they turn right onto New Hampshire. They have to make a U-turn at Powder Mill Road to get onto the Beltway. It doesn't work.
So we've got to fix that. So
Yes.
what's the status of that proposal?
Well, so I think folks are pretty happy with what's being proposed for Powder Mill. I don't know why anyone, and haven't heard anyone opposed to the Elkton improvements. It's just traffic chokers and more green. I think the issue is the slip ramp. There's some opposition in the community, and DOT's decided to do some further studying. That was requested by the community to look at a broader area in White Oak and not just that intersection there, and see if we can work in conjunction. The FDA is right up the road, so they have concerns about all the new employees, as Tina had mentioned, coming. And so there was a request for a broader study. It was agreed upon, and they should be wrapping it up soon. I check in with DOT on a regular basis.
You check in with DOT on a regular basis?
Yes. I check in with all the
Can
departments.
you please let me know the timing on that? Could you please check in with
Absolutely.
DOT? I'm just concerned what's really going on is endless
Sure.
delay and navel gazing. So I'd like to make sure this is getting done.
I think it's a genuine response to the community's concerns to put some further effort into the
I mean, if there's a way to improve it, I'm all for it. But if it's just, let's study this, and then nothing ever happens, then that often is the result. So, thank you.
Let me know as well. And I'm assuming it's Hillendale Citizens Association and others, but let me know what happens with DOT. You don't have to answer the second question.
Stay mute on that.
Okay. So, I'm okay with this as proposed. Ms. Friedson.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really excited to hear about what comes of the mini campus and really transforming that. Is such a great parcel and such a desirable area right off the highway and should in a busy corridor in the county and has tremendous opportunity, I think. So appreciate all the work that all three of you are doing. And I think, it's another example of things might not be moving as quickly as we would hope, but things are happening. And clearly there's a lot of work that's going into it. And I think as I share the comments that were made by Mr. Jawando about the fact that, just like I see White Flint as a countywide, as Chair Reamer said, as a countywide economic development imperative, I see the economic development opportunities and amenities in the East County, particularly along this corridor, which I think is such a priority corridor and has such tremendous opportunity, as something that helps the entire county, not just in terms of tax revenue, but in terms of the schools and job opportunities and access to those jobs and transportation and having a functioning network of jobs and transportation and elsewhere. And I think it's another example of, it's not just by accident that there aren't a lot of jobs in the East County. These were decisions that were made, not just some of the ugly aspects of prior policymaking that we've talked about a lot here, but based on capitulating to existing residents who didn't want change and didn't want new economic development and new types of housing and new things in the East County as these decisions were made, and those small number of loud voices really overpowered it, and we are really paying the consequences and have been for decades of what that looks like in an area that has tremendous potential. And so I think this is reflective of the commitment of trying to undo some of those decisions, because now desperately families want to live close to where their jobs are. People want different options and different types of housing choices. They want their children to be able to move into a neighborhood similar to where they raised them as young workers with jobs that pay wages that pay for houses. And it's tough to undo bad decisions, and it's tough to undo short-sighted thinking, and we are all committed to doing that in various ways. And I just appreciate all the work that has gone on from the three of you, from previous council and councils, and those who've really been doing this work prior to me. I did just want to ask one quick technical question here before we move forward, and I'm comfortable. But on page 3 of the packet, just related to the positions here. The funding for this position is intended to end in FY20, is what is said. And is that related to the coordinator job and the half position? Is that because it's a contract, that's when this current contract ends, and there's an expectation for that to change? What does that mean?
Well, earlier, one of you had asked, and I can't recall who it was, what type of position mine is. It was explained to me when I took the position, it's kind of a hybrid between merit and being appointed. Dee Metz and I were the only two that had this type of position. So it was created for every 5 years, and after the 5-year term, it could stay on for another 5 years. So it's for 15 years total, the council agreed to, for 3 5-year increments. And I guess the point is every 5 years they assess whether the position's still needed or not. And Tina might be able to shed some more light on the financial side of it, but that's how it was presented to me, and that's how I view it. So I may not have a job after 5 years, but I knew that when I took the job.
So thank you for that. And so is the idea that you're going to be coming back to us during FY20 and prior to the next budget cycle with in order to evaluate the next 5-year term? What's the plan for moving forward here? And is that true of White Flint? I mean, is White Flint because this is a bizarre scenario. Let's say, we've talked about making kind of separating the two positions as they originally were, but currently they are very much intrinsically and biologically connected. Currently, are they on the same? Because if they're 5-year terms, they didn't start at the same time. Unless I'm missing something. So how does that work? What's the plan?
They did not start at the same time.
Right.
So the White Flint coordination position started before White Oak.
In 7 years.
Yeah.
Right. So
we're going to have to go back and look at all that.
So you'll be back to us in the next budget cycle with a plan based on the fact that there's 2 different 5-year contracts on 2 different time horizons, and there are budget implications to whether or not they continue and how, and what the what the time half full for both will look like. Is that
correct? We will come back to you with a plan for not just 1 year, but that looks out into the future as well.
Okay, that was the only question I had. Thank you.
Your comments about the past decisions haunting us today are so true. And I was hearing a little history of master plans in Montgomery County and the general plan earlier this week, and I was reminded that at one point the 29 corridor was designated as one of the county's growth corridors or economic development corridors in the Wedges and Corridors plan. And it was envisioned to be not unlike Rockville Pike, or I suppose that's probably the main other corridor, but the council member of that time, the legendary Marilyn Praisner, and many of advocates in the community didn't want that kind of development in East County, and that was removed. That whole designation of that side of the county was removed as an economic development priority, and moratoriums were put into place, and I think that part of the county began a gradual decline as a result. And now we're faced with tremendous commutes. At that time it seemed like, this lifestyle of living, far out and having an easy drive to a job in DC or, in Rockville, how's that ever going to change? Things are good, but things have changed. I mean, you can't even barely commute by car from downtown Silver Spring into DC anymore, let alone being farther up 29. And it's radically changed the quality of life. And now we're trying to work our way out of that. And it's really, really a tough situation. And so creating a job center there, but I think we also have to think more long term and understand that nothing's going to happen overnight. And it would be nice if the GLDC developer was really serious about commercial development rather than just townhouses. So I really would like to see some evidence that they are concerned about doing commercial development and willing to put some skin in the game on commercial development. And I think we ought to be looking at a school. Like, what could we do? I know that was in their plan at one point, but they kind of just never pulled it together. But could we get a med school there and try to... Med schools can be a kind of university-driven economic growth strategy, and maybe there's an opportunity. Maybe we can bring a school from another part of the country in there. There's got to be something. But conversation for another day. We'll have more discussions at the committee about these two major priority areas.
Hopefully we'll have a little bit of heat in here for that discussion. I wasn't sure if this was the chair wanting to symbolically show that we wanted to bring the heat to development in these two critical areas that
I thought all the hot air was going to warm us up.
I tried my best.
So just to make sure, the committee is 3-0 for the recommended amendments to the White Oak. Staff will also, I guess, add for the upcoming work sessions for both of these. Maybe that would be a great time also. That would be a great time to understand the staffing needs, both on the coordinator side. That doesn't change anything related to the White Flint, but that may be a good time for the executive to get things in order to have at that time understanding what we need in White Oak and White Flint for coordination going forward.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.